Shana Tova, Shabbat Shalom. I must have been the last person in the entire world to have gotten COVID. I know, but I'm surely not the last one who has felt the loneliness of isolation. Now, please don't misunderstand. I was deeply touched by all those who called and texted and kept me amused during my waking hours, and delighted by friends who sent chicken soup to cure what Paxlovid did not. But what I didn't count on was the yawning expanse that illness opened up in my world, the length of the hours overnight, and how isolation, brief as it was, could induce a feeling of disengagement which no amount of social media could compensate for. So this was the other side of the pandemic, I learned, as the hours stretched before me. This was the other contagion to which so many succumbed as they remained at home, trying to avoid becoming ill. Overnight, as the quiet promoted ruminating rather than sleep, I recall that King David often woke in the middle of the night. He set down his worries and his hopes in arrangements that we know as psalms, a comfort, an anchor of strength for countless generations who would turn to them thereafter. Listen to his most innermost thoughts. Psalm 119. I long for your deliverance. I hope for your word. My eyes pine away for your promise. I say, when will you comfort me? Or what about this? Psalm 38. O Lord, my groaning is not hidden from you. My mind reels, my strength fails me, my eyes have lost their luster. My friends and companions stand back from my affliction. My kinsmen stand far off. Imagine, even King David, who was inevitably surrounded by an entourage, felt entirely and utterly alone. Because the wee hours, which belong neither to day nor to night, have their own quality, his cry for God's attention is familiar to anyone who has yearned for the morning light, when daybreak might temper despair and even offer companionship. Months ago, when the U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy celebrated the publication of his new book, The Healing Power of Connection in a Lonely World, he observed, what COVID did is really pour fuel on a fire that was already burning. He explained, loneliness is a subjective feeling that the human connections we need in our life are greater than the human connections that we have. And that subjective element is really important because what loneliness is not is something that's determined by the number of people around you. You could be surrounded by just one or two people and feel perfectly content if you have strong relationships with them. According to the Surgeon General, about 1 out of every 2 Americans is experiencing measurable levels of loneliness. So now, look right and look to your left. Fully 50% of us will experience this at some time in our lives. Murthy said this includes introverts and extroverts, rich and poor, and younger and older Americans. Sometimes loneliness is set off by the loss of a loved one or a job, a move to a new city, or health or financial difficulties, or in a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. And yet, it's hard to tell what people are going through when all we can see is what they present to the world. Their attire, appropriate. Their conversation, engaging and thoughtful. And yet we may still wonder if the thought even passed through our minds at all. How could such a lovely person possibly be lonely? I recall that after my mother was widowed for the second time and had moved from her home to a new development, she commented wryly that every day in her new community felt like she was on a first date, because she always made an effort to put her best foot forward so people would be interested enough to give her a second chance at a conversation, or choose to share a cup of coffee, or be patient enough to find a common interest. It was exhausting, she told me. But it's not just the bereaved who experience that profound sense of isolation. Think 50%. Those who are dealing with ongoing illness, whose supportive community may naturally flag over time. As age may diminish one's abilities, that can be isolating. And surprisingly, so many new parents also feel a deep sense of aloneness while they adjust to the responsibilities of caring for a newborn and must wait until their child is old enough to be vaccinated to safely re-enter the larger world. Consider 2 children who are out of step with their peers. And those who are single by choice may still feel a sting of loneliness when they observe the joy of friends who have chosen a partner. And even within a relationship, a bond that was so fulfilling at the outset may have changed over the years, creating an internal distance. So loneliness becomes the byproduct of familiarity. And those who have been marginalized by societies such as LGBTQ+ and other minorities, who struggle daily to be recognized because their worth isn't fully valued. And finally, let's not overlook those who struggle with financial insufficiency and the shame and stigma it causes them, making them withdraw from the community even further. So many more than we even realize. 1 out of 2, at least. Perhaps there's some comfort in knowing that loneliness is pervasive. It's not your challenge alone. We all know that the pain that we feel when touching a hot stove tells us to take our hand away. But what should the painful feelings of isolation teach? Simply that we need to return to the community. Isn't it the greatest irony, though, that it's possible to feel most alone when we are in the midst of a gathering, even here, in this magnificent sanctuary, a congregation which you call home, at an hour which calls us to celebrate? There may still be some who feel quite alone. And personally, I find that recognition painful. And while we name it, let us also temper it just a bit. As we did just moments ago when Rabbi Davidson asked you to share a word of kindness with the people around you, that brief act makes a large sanctuary a bit smaller and more welcoming. And each year, as you return to your accustomed seats, there's a comfort in seeing your neighbors return to theirs. And now I want to invite you to turn to them once again and to introduce yourself by name. First name only is fine. Go ahead, wish them a good Yontif. Take a moment. That is a lot of goodwill. So why did I ask you to do that? Because you, each one of you, are the text of this sermon. And because you are next to one another, you are not alone tonight. From the very beginning of the beginning, as God finished up the work of creation in Genesis, we hear God's surprising dissatisfaction registered in the dramatic words, lo tov, not good. It is not good for humankind to be alone, which led to the next brilliant creation, Eve as Adam's partner. Rabbi Sarah Sapadin taught me that Adam himself demanded a partner when she shared the following midrash. As Adam is given the privilege of naming each pair of animals that God has miraculously produced, it dawns on him that he alone is by himself in the world, noting everyone has a partner, but I have none, an oversight that God attended to immediately. Whether we choose to have a partner or not, Judaism is crafted to function in a specifically communal way. At its foundation, Judaism makes a wonderful assumption about a minyan, a prayer quorum, which is at the core of religious responsibility. Tradition teaches that a full count of 10 people is required for the recitation of certain prayers, among them the Kaddish. For thousands of years, it was and remains the responsibility of every Jew to make a minyan, to put down their work and turn from some enjoyment to participate in the mitzvah, the sacred obligation and responsibility of completing a minyan so a mourner can fulfill their obligation to recite the Kaddish prayer. It does not matter whether or not you have a personal relationship with the mourner or with the deceased. They have a religious need, and by showing up, you make it possible for its fulfillment. And parenthetically, here's a lovely side benefit to that mitzvah. Once you do, inevitably, you'll expand your social circle. The stranger you meet will become, at very least, an acquaintance. Now, the Reform community is much more liberal about a minyan. Everyone is welcome to participate. Every person counts regardless of how they identify their gender. And in the event that we fall short of the requisite number, we don't refrain from saying Kaddish. But the point I want to make is this, that being part of a religious community means that we have to show up for one another, not only for Kaddish, but it's a perfect place to start. And now I want to teach you a Hebrew word. It is shamati. It means, I hear you. But it's more. It conveys that you also hear the need behind the voice, that you understand what the speaker is trying to convey. Shamati affirms that I am here with you to listen and to be present. So would you say it after me? Shamati. Thank you. Thank you for that affirmation, and thank you for hearing. Brené Brown teaches that showing up authentically, hearing someone else, requires a bit of vulnerability. To connect with the pain of someone who is lonely, to hear their perspective means that you have to tap into that same pain, that pain within yourself. She likens it to climbing down into the metaphorical hole when someone feels overwhelmed by the dark and saying to them, I know what it's like down here. You are not alone. And the other side of listening is calling out, to be brave enough, vulnerable enough, trusting enough to say that you feel lonely, that you need a listening ear. Because staying where we are can be so familiar and easy, opening up is anything but that. And here's why it's important. We can't always manage to help ourselves, as this Talmudic story illustrates so well. There was once a rabbi who was a healer. All the rabbi had to do was lay his hands on someone, and they were cured. And then the rabbi fell ill, and he called for a friend to come heal him. The Talmud highlights the paradox when it asks, why couldn't the rabbi heal himself? And the answer is, because a prisoner cannot release himself from prison. We need the word or the touch of another. And that is why community is so important. It's where we meet, panim el panim, face to face, and give each other strength. Meeting loneliness doesn't require a program or an initiative, but simple acts of kindness, of care, of engagement, using the age-old recipe which our parents taught us. They would have us check in with those with whom we have fallen out of touch. They would ask us to pay attention when we are personally in the company of others, and to spare that moment to hear them. They would expect us to be a mensch, to be fully present for even the most casual exchange of greetings, because that might be the high point in someone else's day. In the Unatana Tokef prayer, we feel God's intense scrutiny that every word, every act inscribes itself in the book of life. And just as God notices us and all we do, may we offer that same attention to others, for everyone deserves to be seen and considered for their own merit. This is what God expects of us. In the hours when the world around us quiets and we feel that we are entirely alone, we are strengthened, as was King David, by God's nurturing presence. And when the sun rises again, may we use the spark of the divine that we each carry, the spark that urges us toward holiness and to be a blessing, and reach toward the godlike in others. With each small act of connection, we have the potential to enlarge that flame of the divine. Making the world more kind is literally in our hands. Whether we offer our hand in kindness or find that we need to grasp the hand of someone else, both bring us panim el panim, face to face, as we show up for one another. This year, may we reach out. This year, may we renew relationships. This year, may we enlarge compassion and our connections with others. It doesn't take much to be a mensch, but it can make an enduring difference. Shana Tova to you and those you cherish, and those you have yet to call friend. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be so.